G'day mate, 40 here, North Palm Beach, North Sydney, listening to Richard Spencer here talking about the late William Pierce.
Look, well, these days everyone's lonely, but, if you're an intellectual...
No, not everyone's lonely. People who have marginalized themselves, people who significantly misread reality and alienated themselves from family and friends and community and from their educational institutions, right? If you've been failing at life and not being a good friend and speaking and acting in antisocial ways, then you're going to be much more likely to be lonely.
If you're highly controversial, if someone might get fired for, meeting with you or something like that, then it can get lonely. I actually think Nick is feeling some of this now. I have absolutely felt it. But also, being intellectually lonely is even kind of more difficult because, I'm not an expert on Pierce. I have listened to some of the stuff. I kind of skimmed through this book that someone sent me. But at the end of the day, he's like a guy with a 150 IQ hanging around with KKK members. And, I don't know if he ever had anyone that he could bounce something off of. The only person he could bounce something off of was old Billy Bob, who, has been arrested 5 times for armed robbery.
So there are a lot of rabbis with similar challenges. So Yehiel Yaakov Weinberg, the Srida Aish, was a great rabbi in Europe. He survived the concentration camps. He was living after World War II in Switzerland, and he got an invite to come to Yeshiva University, but he didn't want to come to Yeshiva University because then he would have been number 2 to the Rav, Joseph Ber Soloveitchik, right? And he didn't want to go to another institution because that also would have meant he would have been number 2. So Yehiel Yaakov Weinberg would rather be number 1 in this small Swiss community rather than being number 2 at Yeshiva University and be right in the thick of things. So rabbis have egos, political activists have egos. It's really easy to have an ego that gets out of control or that really works against your best interests. But some people just have to be the star, and other people would rather be part of an all-star team. So like someone like Dennis Prager, right, he says, I'd rather be part of an all-star team than be a star.
And that would also affect his tone because he would naturally become more strident or he would try to sort of dramatize things more to get a response from that audience, right? Because that audience would be more responsive to a dramatic tone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
definitely.
Yeah. So that may have affected him.
Yeah, but I guess to bring it back to what we were saying before, so I mean, the Birch Society was a major thing. They opposed the degree to which they were ever anti-Semitic and or racist is actually dubious. I mean, Revelo Oliver as a member who was expelled, after all, notwithstanding, they probably did on some level oppose the Civil Rights Act for the same reason that all of these southern states voted for Goldwater in 1964. They justified it through libertarianism, etc.
And the membership of the John Birch Society was pretty close to about 99% white.
Etc. But they ultimately did it for racial reasons. Maybe reasons that were even unknown to themselves, maybe. Like they weren't even willing in private to talk about what was happening, but they nevertheless acted on that behalf. And yeah, I mean, realignment in 1964, which kind of took until 1994 to really be fully operational, but it definitely started then. I mean, these are the same.
Well, Richard Nixon won on the Southern Strategy in 1968, 72, which was opposing the Civil Rights Movement, appealing to Southern whites who started voting Republican for the first time, and the Republican Party, which had been anathema in the South, begins dominating the South.
Same people who became Republicans were also voting for the Dixiecrats in 1948 because Truman desegregated the military. So I mean, it's regardless of how they talk about it, it's their actions speak louder than words. They're motivated by these racial fears and so on. But so they did that. I don't know if there's anything. I don't know if there's some smoking gun regarding anti-Semitism in the John Birch Society. Although it is true. I mean, I kind of agree with the left where if you start going down these roads of...
So I went to a John Birch Society meeting about 8 years ago, and I think it was about the threat of Islam to Europe, and I went with a great, I think, Serbian intellectual, and yeah, there were like, there was like one person there, I think it was like very crankily anti-Jewish, but there were at least as many people there who are pretty passionately Zionist, pro-Bibi Netanyahu.
Conspiratorial thinking, you're not inevitably, but you're pretty much likely to end up in some kind of, conspiracy land about the Jews. And I think you end up in a place where you really do misunderstand them. You end up with the protocols of the elders of Zion, basically. Not necessarily, there are many counterexamples for that, but there's a tendency towards it. So I bet a lot of its members did go that way. But anyway, they were attacked by William F. Buckley and National Review. Now, back in 1963 or whenever it happened, or it might have actually been 64. It was once Goldwater had been fully nominated. National Review was the thing. I mean, there's no comparison in a way, because there were so few. There was no internet, obviously. There's just so few conservative outlets that this was the movement right there. And they basically said he attacked Robert Welch on the basis of his book, The Politician. But in this kind of crafty way, he didn't attack the members. And so he said, there are all these good members, but they've been led astray by Robert Welch. It was actually kind of bullshit, to be honest. I'm sure Robert Welch was like more sane.
Right, you can only be led astray if you want to be led astray. Right? People can't force you to go down different intellectual paths unless those paths appeal to your nature.
Sane than 90% of his members. But anyway. That's what he did, and it actually did work.
So members of the John Birch Society, like members of any other ostracized group, tend to be pretty sane in most of their decisions. It's just that they have an interest in a particular narrative that seems from an outside perspective insane, but in the way they run their families and do their jobs, right, seem very sane. Right, so Hugo Mercier, French neuroscientist, makes this point in his excellent book, Not Born Yesterday, that like believing in nonsense about some abstract issue doesn't necessarily shape how you live your life. Right, there's no price to be paid. It's just you get entertainment and meaning from believing in the conspiracy. And so a lot of conspiracies don't necessarily ruin your life.
Coincided. Didn't necessarily work. It at least coincided with the Birch Society. I believe the Birch Society is still around.
I think so.
Yeah. And I remember going to CPAC 10 years ago or so, and they actually had a booth. And it was actually really funny because they had these full color like printouts where they had like, for a constitutional America or something, and they had like multiracial children. So it was like they clearly picked it, like they've clearly taken it from like a stock photo. So there was like a black kid, like an Asian kid, and then a white kid, and then a Mexican kid. Like it was just so, it was almost like, I don't even think a liberal would be that like, blatant or something. It was just PC, and they also would probably tell people that like, oh, we don't believe in conspiracy theories or something. And it's like, okay, well, then what are you?
So it's just ultimately devolved into like basic bitch conservatism, like parchment worship, the Constitution. It's like,
yes,
like this is why like it's ultimately so irredeemable, American conservatism.
Okay, this is nonsense. Conservatism, basic bitch conservatism, republicanism, it's not irredeemable, right? Most important message that Republicans and conservatives can offer is let's lock up the people who commit violent crime. Keep them locked up until at least age 50. Right? You lock these people up, you would significantly decrease the murder rate, and you would double the quality of life for Americans who are being affected by violent crime. So you don't have to be an explicit victim of violent crime to be victimized by it, in that you live a smaller life, you go fewer places, you have to spend more on security, you have to spend more of your mental powers thinking about staying safe. Right? That's basic bitch conservatism and republicanism. Lock up violent criminals for a long time. That's a very important message The think that this is irredeemable is absurd. I guess it's boring. You lock up people who do bad things. You keep them locked up. It's not exciting. It's not cutting edge. It just works. Just dramatically improves the quality of life for millions of Americans. And then the other facets of basic bitch conservatism, which would dramatically improve the quality of life, is to stop subsidizing bad behavior, start incentivizing good behavior. So right now, if you go on disability, people tend to stay on disability for life. Well, maybe we should change those incentives around.
It's just, I find it more odious as an operating philosophy than like leftism at this point.
Yeah, why do you find that odious? Like, lock up violent criminals and restructure social welfare spending and taxation so that you incentivize good productive behavior and you disincentivize antisocial behavior.
But that, that's what it is. And I think it's very interesting. I think they're almost headed back. I mean, this is another. This is a digression a bit, but I think I wouldn't underestimate the degree to which the conservative movement is headed backwards. And I don't mean that as value judgment. Headed backwards to where they were maybe 15 years ago. One interesting thing. I just saw two little notes on this. I'm taking